YouTube has decided to not share my videos with everyone who subscribes. Please follow me on social media to stay up to date. So, Deadpool 2's reviews just dropped, right? Today is the 14th of May, 2018, and the movie comes out in a couple days. And critics have seen it, and critics have been talking about it, and we finally get all the reviews to know whether or not this movie is any good or not. It's Deadpool. It's Deadpool. Like, Deadpool 1 came out of, not, I don't want to say nowhere. It did very well, $800 million. People loved it. It was, a lot of charm and a lot of fun and everything else. This movie, it's rocking an 84%, which is good. It's good, but there's still some problems with it because we know about the problems involving the story, right? They wanted Cable, but over disagreements with the actor to play him, there was the departure of Tim Miller. And as a result of that, we got the new director, David Leitch, who did, he co-directed John Wick, directed Atomic Blonde. Atomic Blonde was a fun movie, but again, the story was kind of, the story was kind of iffy in terms of pacing. It felt very kind of the pacing was very off all the way through, but the action was pretty top notch. Whereas John Wick 2, the other guy who directed that, whose name I forget right now, but the story was a lot better. It was the pacing of the story was great and the action was fantastic. And you can see why that guy's going on to do John Wick 3, whereas David Leitch is moving on from this over Fast and Furious. So it's interesting to see where things are headed. But let's take a look here again. It's got an average rating of 7.1 out of 10. 61 reviews have been counted, 51 are fresh, and 10 are rotten. So it's the general consensus here is though it threatens to buckle under the weight of its own meta gags, Deadpool 2 is a gory, gleeful lampoon of the superhero genre, buoyed by Ryan Reynolds' undeniable charm. So that's just kind of the general consensus right now. But as always, if you're new to the RT recap series on this channel, what I do is I go through the top 5 fresh and the top 5 rotten and do a compare and contrast and more of an analysis of what those possibly could mean. So just in case you don't know what the plot is of the movie, it says here, after surviving a near-fatal bovine attack, a disfigured cafeteria chef, Wade Wilson, struggles to fulfill his dream of becoming Miami's hottest bartender, while also learning to cope with the loss of his sense of taste. Searching to regain his spice for life, as well as the flux capacitor, Wade must battle ninjas, the Yakuza, and a pack of sexually aggressive canines as he journeys around the world to discover the importance of family, friendship, and flavor, finding a new taste for adventure, and earning the coveted coffee mug title of World's Best Lover. So, alright, it doesn't really tell us much, which is fine. Which is ultimately fine. So let's take a look here at the top 5 fresh reviews. All right, just what we have right now, just whatever it brings up as the top 5. So first up is Fico Kengiano from Cine Express, giving it a 4 out of 5, saying, better than the first one, funnier and more bananas with better action and better plot. Ryan Reynolds crushes it once again. Okay, so the plot in the first movie was basic, and that was okay. It was an origin story. They wanted to play up that it was an origin story. They wanted to kind of play on tropes, a lot of meta humor, a lot of gags in that regard, but it was a very straightforward story, which worked for it. So expanding the plot for the sequel obviously is the best course of action, and FICO here, thinks that it was better this time around. Now, Rafer Guzman, Rafer, if I mispronounce, I apologize, from Newsday says here, the Deadpool movies occasionally push the bounds of taste, but they don't take real comedic risks. Viewed as more of an action comedy, then Deadpool 2 works passably well. And this is giving it a 2.5 out of 4. So, okay, so just because it's translated from Spanish, so it says that the movies occasionally push the bounds of taste, but don't ever take real risks. Well, in the first movie, I don't know if I'd really say that they pushed the bounds of taste, so to speak. It was obviously playing up a couple different things, but nothing. I mean, what, the International Women's Day joke, where he's taking it, would that be considered the taste, or kind of pushing it to the bounds of taste? I don't quite know what his sensibilities are. I didn't really feel there was much in the first movie that was going to go over and above and overboard. But we'll have to wait and see here. So Molly Freeman from Screen Rant here says, it honors everything that worked in the original Deadpool while delivering more fun and a complete movie experience in Deadpool 2. So that works for me because, again, Tim Miller's absence from the film, Tim Miller's absence from the movie I think is going to be felt. And I have a feeling when we get to the rotten reviews, that probably will come up. and I've seen certain responses from people online talking about Tim Miller's absence having a direct impact, a negative impact on the film itself. But if it took what worked in the first movie, which is obviously Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool and the supporting cast of characters like Dopinder and Negas on a Teenage Warhead and Colossus, and even Weasel, even though he won't be in anything else going forward, then that could be, you know, what works well for it well. Because, you know, people are like, oh, Dopinder was great. You know, you liked seeing him in it, sort of thing. Now, Peter Travers here from Rolling Stone says, despite a tendency towards elephantitis in story and scope, not to mention blatant franchise pandering, Deadpool 2 still plays like the runt of the comic book litter. We mean that as a compliment. Okay, so you have to love the use of elephantitis in terms of story and scope, because that's generally what happens in sequels. Sequels tend to go bigger, 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 bigger. Sometimes it works in the case, like, let's say, The Dark Knight. Sometimes it doesn't. We can say that probably would be like Thor: The Dark World, you know, in terms of comic book films and whatnot, trying something out that's a little bit different tonally and not really having the impact that they want. So I understand that. Now, he says here that it does also blatant franchise pandering. Well, we saw that in the trailer with the X-Force stuff. We know the X-Force movie is coming. So we know that it was clearly setting up that as a thing going forward, and that probably had a lot to do with the impending Disney buyout of Fox, because they know that they're going to want to be moved into something bigger, maybe get their, you know, get off the ground in their own ensemble stuff, and they're probably going to start toning it down a little bit, which I really hope that they don't. Now, finally, Hugh Armitage from Digital Spy here says, Deadpool 2 has as much heart as the original, and the humor is more consistent, and while we wondered whether Wade Wilson's brand of comedy had its day, the series has moved with the times and feels as relevant and contemporary as it could be, giving it a 4 out of 5. Now, that is interesting, because it says, you know, with as much heart as the original, and the original did have heart, and I think the heart here ties into the kid, ties into the kid that he's trying to save. The humor being more consistent. I felt the humor was maybe a little bit off pitch in the first movie in some particular regards, like the opening scene with him and like the pizza delivery guy, and he's like, well, you know, if you don't have a cat, whose litter box did I just shit in? It felt really, it was funny, but I feel like there should have been more context to that particular joke, and there wasn't really a lot there for that one. So finding a way to kind of make it be more consistent, make the jokes flow a little bit better, it's probably what they spent a lot of time working on in terms of getting Ryan Reynolds' delivery just right. Now, while we wondered whether Wade Wilson, say that 5 times fast, brand of comedy had its day, the series has moved with the times and feels as relevant and contemporary as it could be. So I'm assuming that when it says relevant and contemporary, what it's talking about is not kind of tying itself to previous tropes, tying itself to previous films or previous franchises, but moving into kind of it being self-aware of the current landscape of comic book movies, the current landscape maybe politically, the current landscape involving 20th Century Fox being purchased by the Walt Disney Company. I'm wondering if that has anything to do with it. I know that there was a joke about Disney that they cut out of the movie, so I don't quite know if that has anything ultimately, like, you know, directly brought in, but it could be something that would maybe be considered, you know, maybe like kind of a nod, but not directly, although we'll have to wait to find out. So let's take a look here at the negative reviews, because the first one here is Josh Spiegel from Slash Film, and he gave this 3 out of 10, saying here that much like its predecessor, Deadpool 2 is less of a movie than a smirky feature-length meme generator. Well, Josh Spiegel, I know I shouldn't attack the critic. I don't think he liked the first movie, and I read part of his review on Slash Film, and this is a guy who clearly went into it not liking it. You know what I mean? Like, why they would send a guy who didn't like the first movie to see the second movie and then review it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, unless Slash Film was like, let's be different than everybody else and try to find a way to give it a negative review, so then everyone flocks to read it, and we get the sweet money. Now, Barry Hertz from Globe and Mail says, a movie that feels scribbled in pencil, crayon, drenched in Jolt Cola, and coated with the dust of 1,000 discarded bags of Flaming Hot Cheetos. As it is, Deadpool 2 is a film that is merely aggressively aggressive. Well, Globe and Mail's Barry Hertz, that is mean, man. 2 out of 4 he gives it, which is interesting, because there's a guy over here, he gives it a 2.5 out of 4 and it's considered a fresh review. Here he gives it a 2 out of 4 and it's considered a rotten. You know what? It's just clearly how Rotten Tomatoes works. But, okay, so it feels scribbled in pencil crayon, meaning irreverent, but maybe not grounded. Drenched in joke cola, over the top, right? We've seen some stuff from some of the trailers. And coated with the dust of 1,000 discarded bags of flaming hot Cheetos. I have a feeling what that is right there is I have a feeling that has a lot to do with probably like the lore of comics. I think that's the lore of the characters, and Barry Hertz not maybe fully getting it. That's what I'm taking on that one. But saying that it's aggressively aggressive. It does feel over the top. The action does feel more grounded. Look at who directed it. Right? The action in the first movie was comical, but worked. Tim Miller did it very, very, very just direct, and it worked out okay. Here, you got, the guy behind Atomic Blonde, and it's like 5-minute long, very seamlessly cut together action sequences. Same with the first John Wick. So, yeah, it is going to be different in terms of it being aggressively aggressive. Anyway, Jake Cole from Slant Magazine said, Deadpool 2 muddies the distinction between parodying comic book movie conventions and perfunctorily adhering to them. Okay, so it kind of makes fun of itself but falls into the same traps. One could argue, Jake Cole from Slant Magazine, that that's entirely the point and the joke just went over your head. One could argue such things. But I get what you're saying there. It's trying to buck the system, buck the trend, but ultimately finds itself riding the same bull and trying to hold on for the same 8 seconds. I get that. It's one of the problems, again, moving into sequels. Now, Mara Reinstein from Us Weekly here says, in 2 years, Deadpool has gone from the scrappy class clown to the annoying wise ass in the back of the room, spewing crude insults to amuse himself. Well, Mara, for a character that feels like the original equivalent of what Reddit became, and then eventually turned into what Reddit is, yeah, I get it. I get it, but he was always kind of firing off quips and one-liners. It does feel that here these things are going to be probably more prevalent because people enjoyed that kind of thing. They enjoyed the off-the-cuff ripping. That's kind of what Ryan Reynolds is good at. And I think they wanted to really play that kind of thing up, and that could be, to Mara here, something that is just not working for her in terms of the type of meta-commentary, fourth-wall-breaking humor that that Wade Wilson has put before it. And finally here we have Mark Daniel for the Toronto Sun saying Deadpool 2 is kind of like that zany guy you met at a party once. Yeah, he was fun that first time out, but then you meet him again and he's just more of the same, and that's boring. Well, I think that's just a cultural attack on Canadians. Ryan Reynolds is Canadian and the Toronto Sun is Canadian. So this is clearly Canadian on Canadian crime. But no, okay, so I get it, right? There's the first movie came out, wowed audiences, wowed fans, like, oh wow, they did it for $50 million. It was legitimately good. And then over the course of 2 years, maybe our humor changed, maybe our sense of humor changed. And as a result of that, now it feels like it's just kind of the same old because it was building off of its original roots and not really expanding past that. And that could be one of the things that ultimately leads to it being not what everyone wants, right? And I can get what he's trying to say there ultimately, but at the same time, we can look to see that a lot of the positives kind of counteract the negatives here. It's not that the film and the filmmaking is bad, because no one's commented on that from what I read. Usually there's at least lazy writing. There's a couple things with the writing, but ultimately it boils down to this is more of the same and that is good, and then this is more of the same and that is bad, which is a very weird place to kind of be when you're looking at the ratings and the reviews of this. So I guess ultimately kind of going into it, or at least for you going into it, or for me going into it, it's going to end up being one of those situations where you go, it's going to be more of the same. Now I have to ask myself if that's what I want to see, or if that's something I don't want to see. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a fan of the first movie. First time I saw the movie, I didn't necessarily care for it as much as my other friends did. It took a few more viewings to fully 100% fall in love with it. And if that is more of the same with this particular film, reshoots abound and all that crap, then I'm definitely happy with what we got, and I can't wait to see what happens to it this particular week when I finally am able to actually go and watch the goddamn thing. So I guess if you guys see it, let me know what you think too.